growth requires more than capital.
Why do we call it the cheat code? Nobody said growth had to be fair.
Revenue solves everything.
Welcome to the cheat code. What was our fastest path to revenue?
We tend to like to do things the hard way.
What's the cheat code? It's giving yourself an unfair advantage over the others.
What is it that really works, and how are we going to grow these organizations?
That's our cheat code.
Hey, hello, you're back again on the Go-to-Market Cheat Code podcast. I'm joined normally, as always, by Mr. Josh Wagner. Josh, how goes it?
It goes well. Thanks, Justin. Good to be here.
You're like a different angle today. You can actually see our patio out there.
I shifted 30 degrees. I needed a little bit of a change up, so.
I'm glad it was a calculated shift. So we're joined, as usual, by another great marketer. Today's guest is actually one of my favorite marketers, so happy to have him on the show. We're joined today by Mr. Joe Chernov, who is had an entire string of marketing leadership roles across Eloqua, HubSpot, Insight Squared, and now he is CMO over at Pendo. I think a great general nonconformist to the normal marketing BS. So happy to welcome him to the show.
Thank you. I like nonconformist. Work with that.
We do as well.
We can work with that.
So as always, we only really have one question on the show, and that is, what's your go-to-market / marketing cheat code?
It actually aligns with something I've been thinking a lot about lately, and that is this sort of epidemic of the streetlight effect bias in B2B marketing. And if you can sort of inoculate yourself against that bias, you will be in a really good position. So let me explain for folks that don't know the streetlight effect.
Yeah, please.
It's a bias that's best explained through a story. And the story goes something like this. There is a drunk on his hands and knees at night under a streetlight looking in the side of the road. A policeman walks past, asks the guy what he's looking for. The guy says, "I dropped my watch." So the police officer, Good Samaritan, helps the guy look for the watch. They can't find it. Eventually the cop says, "Well, where did you drop it?" And the guy says, "Over there." And he says, "Well, why are we looking here?" And he says, "Well, this is where the light is." And I think that, to me, that story, parable maybe, it best explains what's happening in B2B marketing, where we do things that are measurable rather than trying to measure the things that are the right things to do. And that's why we have so many lookalike marketing programs. It's because there's a finite set of B2B marketing practices that are sort of accepted to be measurable, that there are conventional KPIs attached to. So we all do the same programs, lowering our collective efficacy and driving up our collective cost. There are more ideas in the shadows outside of the streetlight, but we don't do those. Or we don't even think to do those because they don't come with a preset collection of KPIs that help us keep our job. So we all rush to the same finite set of activities. And it's not good for any of us, and it's not particularly fun either. So if you can recognize that this happens and hold yourself accountable to having some portion of your marketing program be outside of those standard set of KPIs, and then have the guts to say, and if I get fired over it, so be it. I'm going to do a better job. And, that's not on me anymore. I think you're going to be successful. I think you have a really good shot at being successful in this industry.
Well, that's number one, I've never heard that parable before, so thank you. It opens up a big lens of conversation. Like, first and foremost, when you said it, there was a comment on LinkedIn yesterday, and it was, I just brought it up as you were talking, tell a great marketing idea in 6 words or less, and then everyone chimed in with it's got 993 comments on it, or no, over 1,000 comments. And I think one of the most engaged was how are we going to measure it? Which, kind of plays into exactly what you're talking there. So What are your thoughts in general on the entire shift? I think this happened somewhere around 15 years ago with the rise of, all of these MEP platforms and so on. But like the focus on, being data driven and the desire to measure every single output and really effectively tie that to revenue, which is kind of a foreign concept in marketing prior to, let's say the year 2000, somewhere around there, as marketing was really more of a creative discipline. Like, is that I wouldn't even lead the question. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I lied. Right? Like, I was at two of those marketing automation platforms. I was like, a lot. And I what is that, Eloquent? Shoot. I was talking about measure everything, and our content marketing wasn't even plugged into our demand gen. It was just brand. So I think this is part of my penance tour I'm going to begin, right? Joking aside, and that is a little joke in every joke, like that's mostly a true statement what I said. I think that it was necessary at the time to speak euphemistically about everything in marketing should be measurable. If for no other reason than to kind of create this arresting idea that would help people realize that, well, even if everything isn't measurable, maybe most stuff, or at least some stuff is measurable, to pull marketing out of what we used to call arts and crafts. And so it was kind of like we all started speaking in this extreme, saying everything's measurable to illustrate a point. But then we kind of ourselves came to believe it and to forget that it was being said euphemistically, and it took on a life of its own. And here we are now where we do stupid things because we want to attach because we have a KPI to serve rather than a business to serve. And I've done some of these stupid things. I'm not on high saying here, listen to me, you marketers, you're all doing it wrong. That makes me nuts. I was on stage spinning this yarn. And right now there are plenty of times that I've done really stupid things. Thank God I have a CEO that's you did that purely because you're trying to move your lead number. If you just want to help the business, would you have done that? I'm oh, you're right. I have a CEO that shares the same ethos, for lack of a better word. And that makes my job a heck of a lot easier.
So do you think that this is just a self-perpetuating thing that was created by people like you, we'll say, or is there a deeper root to it, right? Is there something that was calling for this?
It's like this elaborate domino that somehow the dominoes also stand themselves back up and knock themselves back down and just keep going along and along. Where the board asks the CEO,
there it is,
to how marketing is performing. The CEO asks the CMO how marketing is performing. It's a chain of pain. It just gets pushed down. And when you get caught in this loop of justifying your existence with this finite set of KPIs, then it becomes self-reinforcing. So even if marketers got the memo that we didn't mean everything was measurable, we just meant a lot of stuff, that memo hasn't reached VCs. That memo hasn't reached CEOs. So even when marketers start to wake into I could actually deliver more value if I threw away this dashboard, it's really hard then, particularly when you want to keep your job, to say to a CEO that's not as enlightened as mine, hey, everything with a grain of salt here. We'll measure the things we can measure and we'll trust the things we can trust. That sounds like you're shirking responsibility or you don't know what you're doing, but that person probably knows exactly what they're doing. But is the CEO then a reliable narrator to the board, right? And the CEO would need to be just as nuanced and just as enlightened as the CMO who says that. And at some point in this conversation chain, it breaks down. The dominoes stand back up and they all fall down again.
Yeah, it's funny because I literally just got a phone call a couple minutes before this podcast with another VC. Long story, we're talking about a business they may want to subsequently do a round within. And the big question was is do they have a predictive model at this point? Is that kind of flywheel established? And it kind of makes me laugh in that regard because we're talking about an organization with like $3 million worth of revenue. But it really is, they haven't gotten the message on that side whatsoever, and especially like within the context of the last 3 years. And so I think it's a great time. Like, what are some of those, air quotes, like stupid things that marketers are doing that like aren't generating results, especially within this environment, and are chasing KPIs that that we can just kind of put out there and flag as maybe items to revisit or to at least question?
Well, I'd rather talk about things that are in the shadows that people aren't doing.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't want to stand here in front of my eye and tell people they're stupid. What I would say is, like, the SEM wars are a necessary tax. They've become a necessary tax in marketing, right? A third of our money goes to buying endo, right? It's infuriating. As a consumer, I never click on, if I like the brand, I'll never click on a paid ad. I don't want to cost them $8, right? But these business buyers, they keep clicking the thing at the top, that's costing me money. I'd rather answer it this way. What happens if you stay under the light? You stay in just that finite set of activities, is that leverage becomes elusive. You start living quarter to quarter, right? You get in the same quarterly cycle that your CRO is, but you make way less money than your CRO, right? They get hazard pay because they get fired after a couple bad quarters. We don't. But you put yourself in the same cyclical existence 4 times a year. You have your head in the guillotine if you ascribe to only being measured by demand gen metrics. So I would say the very first thing to do is establish KPIs beyond demand gen. And on day one, start to habituate your team that demand gen is a subset of marketing. Marketing isn't a subset of demand gen. Start with that. And it's a lot easier on day one than day, 500. Now, if you're on day 500, a little bit of a hill to climb, but start talking about leverage and talk about how you can't get leverage with $1 in, $5 out. That's not leverage. So what you need is 2 aspects, like use political terminology. You need a high floor and a high ceiling, right? That $1 in, $5 out is your high floor. You've got to be good at that. It's not that you stop doing it because it's stupid to do. It's necessary to do because your sales team needs to be fed and with reasonable predictability. Like that 3 million ARR company, they're super predictable. They're predictably lumpy, right? So you got to have a high floor, and that floor height gives you a backstop to start experimenting with some areas where leverage may be found. And so if I'm on day 500 and I want to give my team a little bit more freedom to experiment, be creative, and do some of the things that drew me to marketing to begin with, I would talk about my floor height is demand gen. Everything else is a pursuit of leverage. And that's another way to frame it where you don't sound like you're dodging and you're trying to say, like, let me do things that I'm not accountable for because I can't put a number on them. That's the pursuit of leverage, a way to get a step function gain. That's how I would frame it.
What are some of the things that lie in the shadows, as you say? And then how do we tell those stories to our leadership, whether it's the CEO or the board?
I think the key word is story. That's the only way you're going to move people on what's in the shadows. So I'll tell you a story. We did this program. I just had this hankering to do a Pendo collab. Frankly, I bought my kid a really expensive baseball glove that was a collaboration between a streetwear brand and a baseball brand. And I was like, hey, we should do this at Pendo. And so we did this collaboration with a sneaker designer. And he was a prominent sneaker designer. And I said, look, I want it to be like reminiscent of Pendo, but I want it to look like something I would buy on StockX or wherever. And he did that. And then I was like, the dog who caught the car, right? Oh, well, I got these things. What do I do with them? But that also shows it was like, I never was going to have a KPI here. I just wanted to do it. And we decided we were going to reach out to the most influential people in marketing. I mean, in marketing and product. And I was just going to ask them if they wanted a pair. And there was no form to fill out. I wasn't entering you in my database. And there was no quid pro quo. And so literally the most influential person on the distribution wrote me back. I'll always keep this exchange, and said, why aren't you asking me to endorse you? And I was like, well, because then the deal would be square, right? You get sneaker, endorse me, and we're even. I want you to always love Pendo. And he's like, yeah, but I don't have to do anything. I was like, that's the whole point. And
Mind blown.
he said, how did you sell this to your CEO or board? These are expensive. I said, I just told him good things would happen if good people thought highly of Pendo. And he wrote, yeah, good luck with that. Okay. So that's how it ended. And this is all 100%, hand to Bible. And so we're then preparing for our board meeting. And somebody talks about this like multi-$100,000 op that just was like a bluebird, fell into our lap. And usually we get a lot of 50K ops that are bluebirds. Usually you don't have $600,000 ops that are bluebirds.
Right.
And just as luck would have it, we have this conversation. I happen to be in the room. And long story short, this company attended a workshop put on by the recipient of those sneakers after our exchange, in which he said, you could replace your whole product ops function with Pendo. They call us and said, are we, can you do that? We said, yeah, of course. How many Pendos do you want? If I never knew that, it still would have happened. That's the thing, right? You do have to just have some faith here. Now, I know that, so suddenly the sneaker program went from
genius.
We're in board prep time. So that means my team is working on their QBRs. And the brand leader has in her section on things that didn't work, the sneakers. Then I go in a meeting and I hear about the 600K op coming in from one of these. And I'm like, don't send it anywhere. Move it from things that aren't working to things that are. But it was the same program, regardless of what column it was in. Just because I happened to be in that meeting and that conversation happened to have happened, didn't mean it was less effective or more effective. It just means that the streetlight swung a little bit and pointed in the direction of the shadows. But that doesn't mean it suddenly became a good idea. It was always a good idea. We just got a little evidence to support it.
So you mentioned like the impetus for that idea is often something I tell marketers to do, which is just like, go find, number one, look at what's happening in B2C. And, frankly, look for things that are cool, right? And then try to draw a parallel on how you would apply that to your organization, whether it's on the front end or on the customer side of things, right? Number one, like, is that where you get a lot of your ideas from, or is that just kind of an outlier there? Like, how do you kind of conjure up things that would fall outside that normal spotlight?
It's exactly that. Like a lot of the work we did at Eloqua was inspired by consumer marketing, and they're just kind of better marketers. Right?
They're better, yeah, exactly right.
So when you apply it to B2B, suddenly you're the innovator. Like, people have characterized me as creative, and I say I'm creative for B2B, but I am not creative. I wouldn't last a day in consumer marketing or a consumer agency, but in our world, sure. But most of my ideas have come from sampling bits and pieces of what's in the consumer world. Like, we just did this massive podcast sponsorship where we try to take over every product related podcast with Pendo ads. We also have a jingle at the end of those ads. Because I know, when I listen to podcasts, I'm in my car or I'm going for a run or working out or whatever. And I'm not really listening to the words, but if there's a jingle at the end of them, I'm going to connect that sound to other spots I've heard. And we're going to exploit another bias, an observational bias, where when you see something in two places, you assume it's everywhere. And so we can puff ourselves up to look a lot bigger than we are if we can have somebody connect the dots that we're on two podcasts, ergo we must be everywhere. And the best way to help them connect those dots is by breaking out of the monotony of a red spot and just have this contiguous sound across all of our channels. And we get messages from customers saying like, oh my God, I heard your jingle. It was so cool. That anecdote is a form of data, not super scientific, but anecdote is a form of data. And CEOs are moved by anecdote. Like that's the other thing. I used to say this at Eloqua. The hard part of running brand marketing is that your brand is measured by your CEO's last conversation. If somebody's like, I see Eloqua everywhere, Joe was like, hey, keep it up, Chernov. If Joe Payne was our CEO, if somebody hadn't heard of us that he felt like should have heard of us, he'd be like, hey, how come we're not out there more? Have we dialed back? And he's not alone in this. CEOs have a recency bias. These are all biases to exploit. And so how can you increase the odds that the CEO hears you in the wild, but certainly that their circle hear you in the wild? And little things like that contiguous jingle make it more possible.
It's so funny. I was like, keep thinking about when you're telling the stories about pitching something in the shadows is those Mad Men episodes, right? When all of the minions would be trying to come up with a storyboard and this and that, and they're struggling. And they're like, I don't know if this is any good, but let's send Draper in to the pitch meeting and just have him pitch it. And, Draper comes in and weaves his tail and tells a great story. And everyone's like, oh my God, this is amazing. But it's just a bunch of crap. That's what I keep thinking about when you're telling the story.
Or some peyote at the end. Yeah. Spoiler.
Yeah, exactly right. Oh my God. Well, I love the recency bias of the CEOs because I'm, especially in startup world where Justin and I live, right? Like it is a matter of how do you gain some brand equity and look bigger than you are? So the jingle is a great story. Anything else that, startups can be thinking about to make themselves seem bigger than they are?
I actually think that, I'm since I'm late to the game here, but the most efficient ad spend is podcast. It's like super efficient, and the back catalog is crazy efficient. Like we have a pretty decent budget, and I couldn't afford like the Pivot podcast. I couldn't afford a single episode, but I could essentially run our ads in their entire back catalog.
Yeah.
So that's another way that like, if something seems out of reach, if you're interested in that sort of advertising, then there's other ways at it. Like I think back catalog is a really good hack. Another thing is the way you can look bigger is there's a company I advise called Reprise. I advise them because we were their first customer. And I was a true believer early on. Often it's hard to spin up a freemium motion, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of companies want to do it, but it's a heavy engineering lift. It's really very disruptive to a sales team. It's unclear who owns it. Usually marketing is involved because we have a budget, but so they tolerate us so that they can get our money. But like nobody wants marketing involved in that team. So we use Reprise or other tools to create kind of a deep fake product experience where it is a demo of Pendo with no backend. So it's like the synthetic demo of Pendo where you can actually click on the screen and go into deeper screens, but it's not connected to any data source. It's just this veneer. We did that before we had a free trial and a freemium product as a way to bridge. My thesis here was most companies, most CMOs have two types of demand. They have really high quality demand, like demo requests that are expensive to generate and have a finite number. They have a low ceiling. There's only so many there's only so many people in market at any given time that want to sales. And then we have this very elastic set of demand called MQLs that we can throttle at any time. But the more of them you create, the more people you need to work them, and the more people end up leaving the company because they're low quality and, nobody makes the numbers, and now you just cost the company. There was a missing middle. This is my thesis. These deep fake demos would be our missing middle. They would be people who were just interested enough in the product, not our content, but the product, to take a look. But they haven't gone so far as to ask to talk to sales, and now you got a rep following you around, and people don't want that anymore. And I ruined the whole experience by putting a form in front of it. Right? Like I took something that was in the shadows right?
Right.
It's like deep fake demo that you could just tinker with the product, and it's kind of trippy. And I stuck a form. In my defense, we put the form after the first one, but we still ruined it. And so we got leads that, content leads might say Mickey Mouse at Disneyland.com, but we got like FU at gotohell.com. People knew that this was wrong. Like this was not the way this is supposed to work. And so then we ripped the forms out. Obviously, our leads went to zero. But what we found is if an opportunity viewed one of these demos after being, labeled an op, but
Right.
an account viewed one of these demos after being labeled an op, they were 3 times more likely to buy. So
Wow.
we started with a under the streetlight KPI lead gen. That was the wrong thing. We took something in the shadows, stuck it under the light, ruined it. But then when we adjusted for that, we found, whoa, there's a whole other value here. And it's deal acceleration. And so for a while it didn't make sense to me because here you are you're already an opportunity. You've talked to BDR, you've talked to an AE, you've established buying criteria, right? You have budget. All these needs have been met. These boxes have been checked. And then it turned out the reason why they've sort of gone back, it seems almost like they've gone backwards. They looked at this kind of thin demo, is they're establishing a buying committee. It's not them that's looking at the demo. It's their CFO or it's, an adjacent executive that they need to tap their budget. And now we have a whole new set of KPIs that we would have never come across had we left this alone as a lead gen program. And so that was a really important lesson to me is you can start with a thesis, but back off of it as soon as you get contravening data.
Yeah, I mean, it's portable. They can take it to that individual without, having to pull them into a call and so on. It makes a lot of sense. You guys have been using that solution for a while, Reprise?
Yeah, we were that first customer. So
Yeah.
It's the first thing I did as CMO. So we've been using it. I've been CMO for almost 5 years.
So here's a funny anecdote. So I thought it sounded familiar. And I think this was 2.5, maybe 3 years ago. I was talking to Bill Binch, and I'm like, what are you excited about? Because we were thinking about starting this firm, and I'm looking at different verticals and just different trends and so on. He's like, you got to take a look at these guys. And it was Reprise, in terms of creating these product-led demos where, you can fulfill on your own. And so he's just so amped up about it. And so you talk about influence, there's obviously the influence that you can hear, that's, someone over here, we got that great deal in, it's a Bluebird, so on and so forth. But, it really does happen out there. And I think the key ingredient in that is it's trust, as you mentioned before. We know this is going to do really good things. Trust me. What do you look for in, a CEO, in colleagues, even in your team that is going to, create the license for that amount of trust?
Oh, that's the $1 million question. I've said more than I would have liked to in this call. To the degree that Pendo has enjoyed a measure of success with me as CMO is largely due to Todd implicitly trusting what good marketing looks like with his eyes, not with a dashboard, and my team consistently executing against good marketing. Not a dashboard. Yes, we have dashboards. Of course we do. But we also have the sort of no shit test. No shit, this is going to be effective. I don't really need a dashboard to prove it, right? And I've got a team that gets jazzed by just doing good work. But it starts with the CEO. The CEOs, especially founder CEO, they are present in every meeting, whether they're there physically or not. And so they always have a shadow cast. And so if you're constantly in fear that if I can't prove that this worked, I am going to be in trouble or I'm going to lose my budget or worse, then what are you going to do? You're going to serve the dashboard. And so I would fear looking for another CMO job after Pendo because I know that if Todd was different, I wouldn't have been successful. And that's the most important thing to find if you're out looking. You've got to find a CEO. And I don't have a secret way to find it, which is why I say I'd be afraid if I were looking. You've got to just find a way to figure out if this person trusts their eyes or only trusts a dashboard. Because I can also like work with data science, get them on my side and give a dashboard that says just about anything. I'll lower the definition of an MQL and I'll generate 1 trillion of them, right? We'll change the stage in which an op gets entered into pipeline. We'll move one of the variables out. We're going to pay for it on win rate. That's somebody else's problem. I'll hit my marketing source pipe number. You don't want those games. They're not healthy for the business. You've got to find a CEO that sees that too.
Actually, I had this conversation with a marketing leader yesterday who said the exact same thing. Like, listen, man, if you want me to spin some dials and crank up the lead gen and produce a bunch of shit that doesn't close, he goes, I can do that if it makes me look good. He goes, but I'm trying to do right by the company here, and it's harder and it takes longer for you to like actually see something that you can believe in. So, what do you want me to do? And I'm like, well, I want you to do the right thing by the business. I'm an investor, but I understand the challenge that you're up against here with someone who, is only going to look at the dashboard, right? And looking for the cash register to ring.
You all have a stake in this, right? And you all have a responsibility too, to advocate to CEOs that see marketing as a subset of demand. And this shouldn't be the crap on demand gen hour, right?
Right.
High floor is critical, and it's what buys you the time to operate in the shadows. You got to earn the right to do that to a certain extent, right? But then you all, the enlightened investors, need to lean on your CEOs to create more TODs. Ultimately, what do I want to do in my career? If I could wave a wand, I want to create more TODs. That's the best service I could provide to CMOs.
Great. I mean, it's critical. I think that's the centerpiece of everything we're talking about here. So, Joe, as we kind of wrap up, any parting words of advice to marketers that might be operating in that spotlight just because it's all that they've ever known? I personally tend to think a lot of people end up in marketing versus it being like a really intentional career path. But regardless, there they are, and a lot of the stuff we're talking about has worked really well for a long time. And, I think everyone's sitting there trying to crack the code on, hey, things have changed, that these equations aren't produced any longer. What's kind of what's your advice? What's the first step to take there?
I think a good foundational question is, what would you do to appeal to your buyer? And it's deliberately a generic word. I'm not saying convert. I'm not saying engage. Appeal to them. If KPIs didn't matter, what would you do just to appeal to them? And my guess is it's going to start with old habits, right? Well, if we got them to click on an ad and it's no, I didn't say click. I said appeal. And keep forcing, and somebody would have to do this in a conversation with themselves, so they got to be intellectually honest, but keep forcing yourself to answer that question and only that question. What would you do to appeal to your buyer if KPIs didn't matter? And I think if you kind of rub those stones together long enough, you'll come up with something that's worth trying.
Good advice.
Love it.
Hey, Joe, if folks want to connect with you, what's the best way for them to do so? Where are you at, and how can they get involved?
Well, I don't say Twitter anymore. Those neighborhood. There was a time that was fun. This ain't the time. Boring old LinkedIn. But yeah, boring old LinkedIn. That would be the start.
We should just start assuming that going forward, Josh, because I don't know that there's ever been a different answer on this show.
Go find me on Snapchat. I'll join your Snap map, and you can hang out with my teenager and all of their friends.
And my God, my memory is so bad that it would disappear would be the absolute worst thing for me. I would never remember.
Slack's already bad enough for me, right? with that aspect. Hey, once again, really appreciate you coming on the show. Awesome insights there. If you are just listening for the first time or the 50th time, please give us a subscribe or a follow. Really helps us out with the show. And of course, just I have to drop our requisite reminder that our book, the Go-to-Market Cheat Code, will be on shelves in January of this year. I want to give a shout out and a thanks to Mr. Joe Chernov for joining us today. Joe, thank you so much.
My pleasure. This is fun.
Awesome. And we will see you guys all next time with another episode of the Go-to-Market Cheat Code. Thanks, everyone.